I'm Bob Catman. I'm a member of the WCEP board and also a professor emeritus here at UWM. And I welcome you. Thanks for coming to our brown bag session on character education. And we've got some stuff, a PowerPoint to share with you. Mary and I are going to start out, and this is Mary Dietz from Alberta College. And she's going to primarily lead off on the PowerPoint, and I'm going to add some things as we go through. Again, as we stated earlier, feel free to stop and ask questions as we go through. We really enjoy having them. Mary?
And when we come to the end, we'll come back to these questions. But as a way of having you have a pre-planner for the discussion, we want to talk about how you view the impact of school culture on some important issues like safety and learning outcomes for students and community connections. We really want to learn from you, from things that you've seen and experienced. I don't think we have anybody from the teacher ed program here to talk about the third question. Fourth question is similar to the first one. What issues do we see in schools that relate to the need for character and social-emotional learning? And then how might you support the work of WCEP, the Wisconsin Character Ed Partnership? So our agenda is to provide, first of all, an overview of character education and the social-emotional learning question with connections to state and national policy, and that's what Bob and I will be talking about. Actually, when we talk to people about character education, sometimes they look at us fairly blankly. And so, really, there are lots of things underneath that title. And if you look at the list of things on the PowerPoint, these are important aspects that we expect in society from our schools, but they're not testable in multiple choice formats. So they don't always get the attention that they might. But how many of you are parents? How many of you have nieces and nephews you care about or children you care about? Okay. So you care about school culture and teaching the whole child. You don't want kids to be bullied by other kids. You want schools to be safe and drug-free. You really hope that students will learn to care for each other and care for their world. All of those come through these traits that we have listed up there. And I wish we had a better umbrella term.
Well, and in a way I do, and that is that when you look at character education, just like a family, it's a way of living. And it can't be a program. It's not a 1-hour program once a week or an interdiction into a different aspect of the school. It's something that occurs all the time, throughout the day, through every part of every lesson, as children respond to each other and respond to teachers. And the idea of looking at those different things where you see and say, okay, what values do we really want to have our children to possess as they move through the schooling? And so a good program will be a way of living where those values are transmitted and where children, and it's a two-way street, the children and the faculty and everybody in the school responds appropriately.
So what we plan to do in this short part of our presentation is kind of give you an overview of the field of character education writ large, definitions, a little sampling of the research, and connections to state and national policy. So to start with the definitions, Marvin Berkowitz was at Marquette for many years and is known locally as one of the founders of comedy sports. So you might know his name. But in 2013, he and Bustamante gave this definition, which I think is quite good. Character education is fundamentally about how schools can leverage psychological principles and strategies to nurture the positive development of youth. Because that's what we care about, that the youth are having opportunities to learn to be good people. Building on that, Davidson and Lacona break out, and we'll talk about this several times during the PowerPoint. There's moral character, which is good behavior, living like a good person. But then there's also performance character, which we care about in schools, and that's taking responsibility for your work as a student, to be a responsible learner and really striving for excellence. So it's both aspects, and the one helps the other, as we'll see in the research. Now, a new term, social-emotional learning, has come about. And there's a collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning called CASEL. And if you read through this definition, it's really aspects of mental health. So it reinforces what Berkowitz said about its good psychological principles and strategies. Kids knowing how to address problems and not just respond angrily or with their fists to the first thing that happens. Bob's going to jump in here whenever he wants to. So.
Well, go ahead with the
Okay.
research. And then
All right, we'll get to the research. So what does the research say? A 2006 study really made a tight link between quality character education programs and academic achievement. And we've seen this in some of the schools in the area and in St. Louis, where one of our programs originated that we now have in Milwaukee. And another study showed reducing school violence, the suspensions, the referrals, whatever it might be, and increasing attendance. So the three outcomes that you typically see: increased academics, reduced disciplinary referrals, and increased attendance.
And I'm going to talk a little bit throughout the presentation about a study that 4 other retirees from UWM and I have conducted on 5 of the charter schools that UWM authorizes. And the findings there are striking, is the best way to say it. When you look at K-8 schools in the city of Milwaukee, of the top 10, 7 of them are charter schools. And of those that have a significant minority enrollment, 70% or above, 5 of those are UWM charter schools. And in each case, they have two pillars. And Milwaukee College Prep, which was the one I got to study, says knowledge plus character leads the way to college and beyond. And it's those two that they emphasize almost equally throughout all their discussion. And when you look at the test scores and see that they're competing, when I was with the Office of Charter Schools, the very last year, Milwaukee College Prep was beating 11 of the 16 Milwaukee suburban districts with 99% African American and 78% poverty.
Other research shows that there's a measurable impact on academic achievement for focusing on social-emotional learning. Now, social-emotional learning and character go hand in hand, but this research was done on looking at specific social-emotional learning programs. If you could have an 11% gain in your percentile scores in a school, that would be a significant gain. And that's across a meta-analysis of many studies. That's the typical gain when you are attending to students' ability to handle their emotions, to work effectively with others, to control their anger, to work on caring and empathy for each other.
Go to the next one.
Okay?
When you're looking at on this research study, and it summarizes some of the same things we found. First of all, classrooms with few, if any, disruptions, where the lesson goes along quickly. As a result, really improved test scores. Greater civility and teamwork among children and faculty at a school. And I think that last is something I can't emphasize enough. In these schools that we studied, it was not only the children who were taking the character education lessons to heart, but the faculty and how they worked with each other, how they talked to each other, how they brought up ideas and put forward new ways of improving the school. And it gets to the point where, now these are K-8 schools, but where there's almost no violence at all. And I had a unique little story, I guess. A few years ago, you might have remembered that coming back from Summerfest, a group of African American kids came to that one gas station and went in and stole stuff and really became a menace. And the next week I was at Milwaukee College Prep, and one of the boys said, if we had been there, it wouldn't have happened.
They would take responsibility for stopping.
We would have taken responsibility and said, this is not right. And it's that kind of thing when you bring it not only in the school, but also in how they live their daily lives. that changes a lot of different things.
Now, Elaine is going to address the point you made about the adults are critically important, because that's one of the key 11 principles of character education. And I want to just let you know that Ed Dunkelblau, this researcher, is going to be at the Character Ed Conference this summer, which is sponsored by South Milwaukee Schools and supported by Alverno. It'll be at Alverno. And this is the first of 3 slides of some of his findings. So this relates to success in the classroom. The second, success in the school. School-wide, when you really focus on social-emotional learning, another name for character education, then you get these outcomes, which are typical, as we said earlier. You improve the school climate, students feel more like they belong and have a connection to the school, bullying becomes less an issue, more attendance, fewer suspensions, less at-risk behavior, fewer disciplinary referrals. So it fits in with your story from before.
And that connection to the school is something which is exceedingly important. In interviewing students, they would tell me, this is my school. This isn't the school I happen to be going to. This is my school. And that changes their whole outlook when they start to own the school.
And then you get remarks like, we don't do that here.
Yes.
To students who come in from other schools. You know, we have a sense of place here.
Another little story on that, I was at the Young Leaders Academy on 13th and North, just observing one day, and there were 2 4th graders that decided they were going to have fun and run down the hall and push and shove a little bit. They didn't get nabbed by teachers, they got nabbed by 2 8th graders who said, "What do you think you're doing here? We're YLA, we don't do that here. If you can't behave as you should, you need to leave."
And of course, all of this is focused on success later in life. We don't encourage social emotional learning and character education just to be in school. It's really helping kids become the persons they're going to be. And so again, Dunkelblau's research shows the adults who have had good character education, good social emotional learning, will have more empathy and tolerance that they carry all the way through their life. And if you look at the rest of the topics on this slide, these are things we really care about in the civic community, in the workplace, and with parents. So the payoff is far more important than a temporary test score. It's really the kind of people that we hope to have in our society.
And there have been some studies on the programs that are meant to bring adults who haven't done too well in school into the job area, and by and large, they don't work. The youth training programs throughout the United States are somewhat of a failure. Research was done to find out then, well, why is that? And the answer is they don't have these soft skills. And the question then is, where do they learn them? They learn them early in their life, between 3 and 8 years old.
The second part of this is to talk about connection to state policy. There's a lot about academic testing on the DPI website, but if you go to the WINSS Successful School Guide, you'll also find that we have in Wisconsin Standards of the Heart, which encourage schools to attend to character and social-emotional learning. And the piece in this slide that I want to highlight, again, goes to what Elaine's going to be talking about. You really have to plan for this to happen. It doesn't happen magically. And schools that pay attention to really building the systems that help students develop that sense of, we don't do that here, that sense of, I want to be proud of my work and proud of my behavior, really work toward that in the planning. And it's not a program. We like to say it's not another thing on the plate, it is the plate. It's the basis for what we're doing. And Wisconsin also has a positive behavior intervention and support network that the state mandates, but it's also focused on the same aspects that we are promoting in WCEP, that you have a responsive system, a culturally responsive, multi-level system of support that helps students develop what we talked about before, the moral character, the behavioral piece, and the performance character, the academic piece. So you're looking at the whole child the person who is a good human being and the person who is an academically responsible citizen of the school. And then moving to national policy, the Interstate Teacher Assessment and Support Consortium Model Standards, which were revised in 2011, focus in several places. I was co-chair of the group that did that revision. But in Standard 3, which is about creating school environments, it's really very clearly focused on these kinds of issues, as you'll see here. And the bottom part of that, again, points to moral character and performance character. We want our teachers to be able to help students develop shared values and expectations for respectful interaction. If you treat others respectfully, that goes a long way to building this kind of culture we're talking about. But then also rigorous academic discussions and individual and group academic responsibility. So learning how to work toward quality work.
And that's important. Another little saying from one of the charter schools is that the only place success comes before work is in the dictionary. And so the idea, the emphasis that you've got to learn to work hard if you're going to succeed. And that's all, again, tied right into the character ed.
And two other national organizations that address these kinds of issues. The first is the National School Climate Center. And again, if you look at their literature, it's the same sort of issues, the same sort of questions. So there are many, many organizations working toward this same thing. We all have different words and language, but you can key into the same issues. Here they're focusing on a sustainable, positive school climate that fosters youth development and learning. And they're making the link then to society and how we prepare students to be active citizens and contributors to society. And the National School Boards Association has a school climate survey that gets at some of the same things. And these are all tools that schools can use.
And when you look at maybe a summary statement, when you have a strong character education program and both faculty and students are part of that and working together, teachers can teach and students can learn. And that's why you get the academic achievement.
Now, the second part of our agenda, I'm going to pass the clicker to Dick, is an overview of our organization, the Wisconsin Character Ed Partnership.
This began 7 years ago, and it began as an offshoot of the national organization. We're informally connected with the national organization. But it began with the idea that we wanted to serve the professional community in Wisconsin and assist them in moving in the direction that's just been described to you. And so, being the listeners, we went to what then was the Jefferson area statewide character education conference. And we asked the educators, we gave them a list of things on board. And they looked at the list and they said, all we want, and it wasn't on the list, is just give us credit for what we're doing. So we listened closely. And the advisory committee of WCEP, made up of mainly educators, superintendents, principals, a school board member, and a businessman, decided, and there was one college academic person. They said, well, then that's what we should do. And we came up with what we call promising practices. It's one of the 11 principles. And so the next year, we submitted, we sent out applications. If you are interested in getting recognition, submit one of those 11 principles. An application would take an hour and a half to fill out. A committee of teachers headed by somebody who had been certified, was being certified actually, at a national level to be a judge of state schools of character, processed those applications. And a group of schools received the promising practices. That practice has evolved into all the states, many of the states that are involved in this, and to the national level. So there's hundreds of them given out at the national level. And we give out usually a dozen to 20 of these a year, and have been for a number of years. That then was the lead to go to the state schools of character. And so 4 years later, we had our first National School of Character from Milwaukee. Their first application wasn't even considered. It was that far off. The principal, being a very good learner, a fast learner, figured out where he was wrong. We got him to attend the 11 principals training, and he figured it out, got it in service, and he completely moved the school in a year. And the year later, they submitted their application. They became a National School of Character. It's one of the schools that Bob studied in.
For the first one in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah. So, anybody can enter, you see these circles I have, anybody can enter promising practices. They can come to the annual conference, which is sponsored by a school district. The school district now is South Milwaukee, and River Falls has one up north. And then the last thing we added was LACES, which is the Leadership Advanced Character and Culture in Schools, which is conducted at Alverno. So Alverno is a partner. School districts are a partner here, and here it's being sponsored by UW-M. They've just come into it. We've signed an agreement, and we're in the process of orienting them. So you can come in any place here, and you can get to the other. The most popular place is Promising Practices. If you get a Promising Practice, you will get this year 5 scholarships to go to a day-long 11 principals training, and Elaine's going to get into that in more detail so you can appreciate what these 11 principles are, and then the state conference. But the only proviso is your school leader, administrator, principal has to attend with you. There's a couple of quotes here that I think are really important in the bigger picture, kind of why is this group here? No 501c3, volunteers, sponsors of these various segments, outside sponsors, funding from various people. Martin Luther King said it, intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. Then there was somebody a bit back, Teddy Roosevelt, that said, to educate a person in mind, but not in morals, is to educate the menace in society. Cicero, going back even a little bit further, within the character of the citizen lies the welfare of the republic. Our founders, the nation, studied that. Why did 100 failed city-states democracies fail? And they determined the lack of virtue. Hence, the first mandate of public education was, anybody know? Everybody in this room knows, actually, is to create virtuous citizens. It was not about anything else. And they studied Cicero and the great minds. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Elaine.
Did you want to show that?
Yeah.
Now here are all the people who have gotten promising practices by counties. And there's a handout with all of them listed.
And that's just for this year, 2014.
Yeah, that's just this year. But there's a master list.
Yeah.
Amy just gave them.
Okay. And there's another map that shows the state schools of character, where they're coming from. And 2 of them this year come from the urban city.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm Elaine Gehring, and I've been involved since the early days of the WCEP and came to it from having been a building principal. So I came to it with very definite ideas and interest in terms of what could be done and what should be done and what I wanted to learn about it as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 11 principles. I have been trained by CEP, the national organization, as one of the national trainers, and so that is one of the pieces that's attached to that conference that you have the brochure for. There is a day-long training on the 11 principles. They're really, as you saw on that early list that Mary showed, all the listings of the different kinds of programs that are part of character education that we think of when we talk about character education. There's really a myriad of ways for a school to approach the concept of how to develop character education. What CEP has tried to do is really to create a framework or a kind of a map for schools to look at. Because every school, I would say to you, I don't think you could barely visit a school anywhere that isn't doing something that is related to character education. They might not even call it that, they might not realize that, but just by the essence of being an educator and working with kids, you probably have embedded some piece of that. But very often schools don't recognize that. So what CEP tried to do was create this framework of 11 principles so that schools could look at what they're doing already and then build from there. But in fact be inclusive so that you're not just talking about it. You know, the last thing we want is the counselor comes every other Friday, and when she comes, we talk about character education. That's not what we're talking about at all. As Bob said, it has to be part of every day, every person in the school. It's part of the guts of the school, I usually say. So that was the intent as the 11 principles were developed, and there was lots and lots of work that went on. And I think it's important to recognize that every school that goes through this process does not end up with a cookie cutter version at all. I say to schools, if you came looking for a recipe, this is kind of a recipe, but you won't get the same cake at the end. Your cake will look very different than everybody else's. This looks at 12 or 11 different aspects of your school and asks you to consider all of those aspects. So the 11 principles are not sequential, and schools generally start in different places. The 11 principles are really broken out at and you have a sheet actually, this one that does list the specific 11 principles, but I'm just going to go through them very briefly. The assessment, the 11th principle is really the overarching, because you can't know where to begin until you know where you're starting. How are we doing now? And so assessment is one of those, and I'll talk about that a little more. And the others are broken up into these 3 areas. The first being, what is character education? What do schools with embedded character education look like? And finally, who needs to be involved? And you'll see they're kind of clustered like that. I think, you know, a couple things are really important here. Though we say it's not sequential, principles 1, 2, and 3 really kind of form a foundational piece. And you'll see that as I go through them. The other really important piece is that single word in the second section about embedded. That is a strong, strong element of this whole way to look at character education. The fact that it's a piece of everything that goes on, that nobody says, oh, now we're doing character education. No, character education happens from the time that schools are hiring teachers. As you're interviewing teachers, you're looking for people that have the same set of goals for kids, and to recognize the importance of embedding character education in what you're doing. So, you know, it runs through everything. It is part of everything that goes on in a school from the beginning of the day through the end of the day, and time when kids aren't there and long before the kids get to school. I'm just going to go through them kind of briefly here. The first 3, the first one talks about core ethical values. And the idea of this is that that many schools, I guess I would say many schools already have identified core ethical values. They might look different. Lots of schools have, we stand for 9 things, and so one a month they do a core, you know, they do a value every month. That may not be the ideal, but we recognize that that's where they've begun. And so we give value to what they have identified in their school as important. Because we're asking them to identify core ethical values that they really intend to continue and embed in their school for the long haul. This isn't just, this year our theme is the Olympics, and next year our theme will be good friends. You know, that isn't what this is about. This is, you know, we started this year, and this goes on forever, long after I leave as the principal, long after things have changed several times over. You want these to be things that the teachers and the students and the parents have recognized are what they really stand for as a school, what they think is important. It's important, the second principle talks about thinking, feeling, believing. And we sometimes think about that as head, hand, and heart. You can't just talk to kids about character education. You in fact have to give them opportunities to be doing it. You have to give them opportunities to be reflecting about it. And you have to consider that as you're going about your program. So you're looking at the cognitive, the affective, and the behavioral aspect of how kids learn. Because some kids, we all know this, have a stronger suit one way or the other. And so you want to provide opportunities all across that spectrum of learning as you develop your character education program. The third principle talks about it being comprehensive, intentional, and proactive. It can't be just, oops, we're having a little trouble in the lunchroom. We better get stuff going here and do a better job with lunchroom behavior. This has to be looking ahead and saying, what do we need to work on as a school? How are things going now, and what will make it better? So it is all inclusive as you go through this. It's also looking at everything from when the kids get on the bus in the morning, when they go through the lunch line, how they interact with everyone throughout the course of their school day. And that's what they mean by that idea of being comprehensive as well as proactive. As we go to the fourth, it talks about that this only works if you already have or are working on developing a caring school community. This is a real pivotal piece. You can't say we're working on character education in our school and have even the adults treating one another poorly. Bob talked, or someone earlier talked a little about the modeling piece of this. I say to teachers that you can't talk about respect and being a caring community with kids, and then they see Mr. Jones and Mrs. Smith arguing about who's using the computer lab during fourth hour. You know, the lesson just goes right out the window. This has to be something that happens every day, all day, among every level of individual working in that school. It has to be a respectful, caring place for all the individuals there, and that's how children begin to understand that. I've actually heard of some schools that for an entire year, when they really want to get things going in their school on character education, they don't even take it to the kids for a year. They work with one another in staff meetings, and they talk about what do we value and how do we function as a group. And by the time it goes to the kids the second year, the kids already get it because they have seen the changes. They understand that this is the goal and this is where a school is moving toward. The fifth principle talks about the opportunities for moral action. And we don't just mean, you know, collecting Campbell's soup and bringing in peanut butter. Lots of schools do those things. Those are wonderful things, and we call, you know, we might think of them as outreach opportunities for kids. But they really don't talk about moral action because we talk about service learning. And one component of character education in the school is that aspect of service learning, so that it's connected to the curriculum, so that students are part of the plan. It isn't, you know, Mrs. Smith loves this project. Whenever the kids get to her third grade, everybody does it. That's all well and good, but let's recognize it for what it is. It really isn't particularly an element of service learning. Kids have very little input into it, and we want opportunities for kids to be doing things within the school. Moral action can be helping Bobby when he's been out sick for a week, and we know that in our school and in my classroom there's an expectation that I'll help Bobby. He sits next to me, I'll help him get caught up. That's an aspect of moral action as well. So it's going from the school out and beyond, from the classroom out and beyond, to give kids opportunity. Because this moral action piece is a part of that, remember we said head, heart, and hand, the behavioral piece. This is an opportunity for kids to act, for kids to understand this is what it looks like, this is what it sounds like. The next one talks about a meaningful and challenging curriculum. This is the idea that character education, as we talk about the concepts, and we talked a little bit about the performance values as well as the character values, you can't talk about those in isolation. You can talk about them in isolation, but they're not very meaningful to kids. You really want to embed them within the lessons and within the dialogue of the classes, so that this goes on. When you're talking in Hamlet, you're relating with students to the reading that they're doing and highlighting the issues related to behavior and moral values in character education. When you're doing, you know, history and literature are just ripe with opportunities to embed character education and to embed character education opportunities. Sometimes math teachers or physical education teachers say, well, that's all well and good, but what about me? A lot goes on in any classroom and in any place that kids are involved in learning that is, again, ripe with opportunities. It may not be talking about the concepts, but you're giving them opportunities to interact with one another and talk about how we work together, who takes leadership in the group. Everyone can take leadership, how we treat the other people in our team. All of that goes on in every single classroom. So it's sometimes the skills. We talk about social emotional learning. Sometimes it's the skills of social emotional learning, not the words or the concepts. But that's another aspect of embedding it in a meaningful and challenging curriculum. The seventh one talks about the idea of the opportunity to foster student self-motivation. And this talks about how the behavior management, perhaps as you might call it, goes on within a school. The idea that we're trying to increase intrinsic motivation and decrease extrinsic. We're really looking for kids. The example of if that had happened, that gas station story, that if that had happened, we would have stepped in. They understood, those kids understood intrinsically, this is the right thing to do. There was no pizza party waiting for them if they stepped in to help out. They understood that was the right thing to do. So that doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes there's a challenge there with PBIS and the idea of how that very often looks extrinsic. But there are a lot of opportunities to combine that in the school so that you really are helping kids work toward the intrinsic. They understand, this is what I do because it's the right thing to do. The next piece, the 8th, talks about engaging the school staff. What this can't be, if it's going to be successful, and that's what, again, we spend a lot of time working through all these. I'm giving you the very quick version of. But these, if you would think about as I'm going through these and all the items that are listed on the sheet, as kind of the branches of that tree of character education within the school. Each of these is kind of a branch, and I say to schools, think about what you're doing already as the leaves that are hanging on that tree. You've probably got quite a few leaves up there already, but there might be 6 over here on caring community, and there might be none over here that talks about this aspect of engaging the school staff. You want to look at it so that your tree is full of leaves, so that all 11 branches have really been developed in your program, and then it does become embedded and infused throughout the program. Engaging the school staff talks about the idea that it can't just be the principal's program, it can't just be the counselor's program, it can't even just be the teacher's program. This needs to be something that everybody in the school is involved in, the training and the expectation of modeling. We say that you don't get to choose who it is that kids are going to pick as their role model. For some kids, that might be the custodian who comes through, back hall when the kid is ducking off to the bathroom, and he encourages them and gets them back on track and helps them get back into the classroom. One never knows who those role models will be for students. So it's important that every single person that comes into contact with your kids is involved and understands what we're working on here and what is our focus. And again, that starts with bus drivers and goes, all the way up and through the school board. It has to be everybody. And it has to be everyone as well that treats one another well, like I said earlier. It can't just be, we're good to the kids, but don't watch us when we get together, in a disagreement. That we all work on this all the time, all together. So engaging the entire staff is another important piece of that. Along with that, as a follow-up, is the idea of the shared moral leadership. And this as well goes along with the idea that not only is it the entire staff that's involved, but everyone in the staff feels a role of leadership and is involved in that. It isn't just Mrs. Gehring's program and we do it because when Mrs. Gehring's here we do it, and you know what, she'll retire eventually and then there'll be somebody new and then we can go on our own way. That isn't what this is about at all. It's that we're all part of that. And when, I think Bob talked about that, this is my school. The kids have a sense of this is, this isn't just a place I go to. This is my school, it's important to me. That's I think, a great indicator of that aspect of they've been given opportunities to feel ownership and to experience leadership within their own school. This isn't just about adult leaders, it's about student leaders as well. And every child in the school having the opportunity. Because the more that kids get connected to their schools, that stronger connection that they feel, the more success they will experience. Because then they're really engaged in it. It isn't somebody doing it to them. They're connected and they want to be part of it. The next one, so we've talked about how it has to be all the staff, that all the staff, everybody in the school has to have a leadership role, but you can't stop at the doors of the schoolhouse. You really have to go beyond as well, because you want to involve parents and community members in this effort. If you're really going to be all inclusive in your school, this can't be just something that happens here at school. And so we look for schools that will find ways to engage parents, starting at step 1. Remember, step 1 was the idea of identifying core ethical values. So the ideal is, if in fact you're really starting at base 1, that you have parents talking about what's important to us as well. So the very basis of this comes from parents. And so that parents and community members know what it is that you as a school are focusing on. And then finally, the 11th is where we began. This was the overarching number 11 on that first earlier grid, the idea of evaluation and assessment. And these are all the kinds of things that we use to look or try to help a school look at where they're starting out from. These are some of the measures that we talked about had shown significant growth if schools are involved in character education programs and have really done a good job of embedding these programs within their schools. So, but you have to know where you're starting from, and so you begin with assessment, and then you continue to assess and do school climate studies over the course of the years that you're working with the program and watching it grow. And these schools that we see as schools of character, I'm going to kind of use that as a bridge that bridges over. These are schools that really have started in general some years ago, and they do continue to assess and look at new places that they can grow, in new places that they can develop. It isn't, well, now we're done, we don't have to do any more of this. It's really exciting when we see that those schools that have already been identified as Wisconsin schools of character are still coming forth with new promising practices, because they're still looking for ways to get better, to create more leaves for that tree. They've already got a pretty full tree, or they would have never made it to the state school of character level. But they're continuing to look for new growth and to adapt and change as they go along. Dick mentioned these are the two programs that we really help to support here in the state of Wisconsin, and they echo the programs that CEP does at the national level as well. You'll see that both of them are really based on these 11 principles that I just gave you, that little quick description of those 11. Because again, when we're looking for promising practices, we're saying find something that you're doing in your school that's having an impact and positively improving character education in your school. You don't have to give us all 11, just look for something that you're doing, and we're asking you to find a link to one of those 11. That's, again, the idea of celebrating that starting point, that you have to say, hooray, you're doing something great. Let's, where are we going to go from here? And so many schools start with doing a promising practice application, and all of those, the description of all of those are on our WCEP website, and you can look through and read what they had done in past years, what they're continuing to do, because we also want to create exemplars for other schools. And so we have them all listed from 2007 when we started doing this, and that's all listed on the website. And it's a wonderful variety of different aspects. Again, they're single aspects, but those single aspects together begin to grow and blossom such that they are moving toward being a state school of character. And shift over to here. Obviously, we've had many more of these, 64 of them over the course of the years. Here we're at a much newer level, but we also didn't start this until 2009. We felt that, as Dick mentioned, the place to begin was the promising practices, because if you were coming from nowhere and saying, okay, here's this great application you have to do, and you have to tell us all these 11 ways and all the things you're doing across these 11 different aspects of your school. Whoa, if you're starting from scratch, that seems overwhelming. But in fact, if you've already won a couple promising practices, you've been working with the 11 principals, you've had teachers from your school coming with scholarships to the training each year, it has grown in your school. And then we really encourage people to come forth and give us an opportunity to identify them as state schools of character. And then we send them on with the hope that they will be national schools of character. And as you can see, we have done very well. We've had 4 national schools of character and 1 national district of character. This is an area that we're, we don't have a slide that says help wanted, but that, this is an area that we would say, there's always help wanted. They mentioned that the UW-M School of Education has kind of joined on with us for these programs. This is, a once a year meeting is what it is. We ask schools to apply for either state school of character or promising practices. Then they all get submitted. I send them out to reviewers, and then we do the reviewing, and then we come together for a single meeting and identify who we will be designating that year. I don't like to call them winners because that sounds, that is not what I'm looking to do. I call them designees. So I don't know what the national calls them, but I think that is a little easier. So we are always looking for folks. It's a very exciting thing, and I know one meeting doesn't sound like a very exciting thing, but it gives you the opportunity to see what's going on out there. And especially as you do it over the years, you begin to see, oh gosh, we gave them one last year and it was kind of okay, but now look what they've developed and look what else they're doing. And to see from year to year how schools have really grown and developed is really very exciting. And we do encourage any of you that would like to get your foot wet with this. This is an event that truly I am always looking for more folks to help us, so we would welcome you.